who actually writes the bills that get voted on and debated during each legislative session in your state. Well, actual state legislators, at best they might be an expert on one or two areas of policy. They can't be expected to know about absolutely everything from housing to tax to education to finance and so on. It's just impossible. So it's always the case that legislators rely on other people to have done research and to, have written model legislation in a lot of cases that tackle various problems that they might want to address. It's not the case that your local state legislators necessarily sitting there writing every bill that they sponsor or co-sponsor themselves. Often they're having external help, and that help could come, in some might say bad cases, from industry lobbyists, from affected groups. So, it could be an organization of bankers, of Chamber of Commerce, various groups like that. You can see that as good or bad, depending on your take. It could be a trade union, like the teachers union as well, writing what they consider to be good education policy. Or it could be groups like where I work, the Institute for Justice, where we have our guiding principles of liberty, whether that's free speech, property rights, school choice, economic liberty, so on. And then we use those founding principles to produce policy. We have a research department that, analyzes numbers and compares different states, and we use that to produce model legislation of our own. And model legislation is just high-level legislation that could then theoretically apply to any state in the Union, all 50 different states. And we produce it to encapsulate what we think is good policy into legislative language. And then we can give that to state legislators in various different states. And then if they like it, then they can adapt it for actual use in their state. And at the Institute for Justice, we have lots of different model legislation. So this one's Collateral Consequences in Occupational Licensing Act. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but what that basically means is that if you have a past criminal record, often that can bar you from getting back into a licensed occupation, whether you want to be a barber, a cosmetologist, a makeup artist, or whatever else it might be. And we think that sometimes those barriers are too high and it locks people out of being able to earn an honest living once they've paid their debt to society. So we did research, and from that research, that informed our model legislation on that topic that we can then offer to legislators in different states if they want to take action on that issue. Or look at this one, for example. This is the Protecting Everyone's Constitutional Rights Act, or PECRA. So this is tackling the federal judicial doctrine of qualified immunity that basically immunizes a lot of federal government officers if they violate your constitutional rights, even if they commit quite brazen violations. Often people can't get any recourse for that. We think that's wrong, so we've created a state-level remedy. So if a government official harms one of your constitutional rights, then you can actually seek an injunction, seek damages as well for the harm that might cause you. Or another one that's very dear to my heart, the Housing Opportunities Made Easier Act, or the HOME Act. So this is our model zoning reform legislation. So this one looks at land use reform and all the ways that government prevents property owners from being able to do what they want with the property that they own in ways that artificially restrict housing supply. Often that means you can only build a single family house instead of maybe a duplex, a triplex, a townhome, a small apartment building. Obviously that greatly limits the amount of housing that there can be, contributing to the housing crisis. So we created that model legislation that we can then offer to different state representatives to tackle the housing crisis in their states. And obviously, as with all these things, we adapt it to the individual state. Some states already are better at issues, some have more struggles with issues, so we can tailor the individual clauses in the bill so it actually matches the problems in those states. Also got model legislation here on food trucks, making it easier to own and operate a food truck. Often they face horrendous difficulties just being micromanaged by every single municipality or city where they're trying to operate, and that can just bleed them dry, make it too difficult to do. And food trucks are a great way for people to just begin business with low capital overheads and just, get their foot on the first rung of the American dream. Or our model eminent domain legislation, making it harder for the government to just seize your property for what they consider to be a public use without appropriate safeguards and so on. So this is just some of the ideas, and it's not just IJ. We're just one of many groups that offer model legislation to state legislators in different legislatures in different states all around the country, advocating for what we think is good policy. We're always working on new model legislation and then promoting our own as well in different states. So here in Texas, I promote our model legislation to state legislators in the capital in Austin, but I also travel around different states as well to do the same in other states and at the federal level as well. So that's a little bit about how some of these bills actually get written. It's not just your state representative, with a eureka bulb above their head coming up with all of this by themselves. They do sometimes have external help, and sometimes that help comes from people like me.